World of Warcraft, The Last Guardian, by Jeff Grubb. Chapter 16, The Breaking of a Mage. It was inspired, I must say, said the Medivh, who was and was not Medivh. Inspired to summon the shadow of my past, a piece that would stop me from pursuing you. Of course, while you were out gathering your strength, I was out gathering my own. Khadgar looked at Garona and nodded. The half-orc moved a few steps to the right. They would surround the old man if they had to. Master, what happened to you? Said Khadgar, taking a step forward, trying to focus the Magus's attention on him. The older mage laughed. Happened to me. Nothing happened to me. This is who I am. I was tainted from birth, polluted from before my conception. A bad seed grown to bear bitter fruit. You have never seen the true Medivh. Magus, whatever has happened, I'm sure it can be fixed, said Khadgar, walking slowly towards him. Grona orbited out to the right, and her long-bladed dagger had vanished again. Her hands were apparently empty. Why should I fix it? Said Medivh, with an evil smile. All is going according to plan. The orcs will slay the humans, and I will control them through warlock chiefs like Gul'dan. I will lead these mishappen creations to the lost tomb where Sargeras's body is, protected against demon and human, but not against orc. And my form will be free. And then I can shed this lumpish body and weak-ended spirit, and burn this world as it so richly deserves. Khadgar stepped to the left as he spoke. You are Sargeras. Yes and no, said the Magus. I am, for when Argwin killed my physical body, I hid within her womb, and invested her very cells with my dark essence. When she finally chose to mate with a human mage, I was already there. Medivh's dark twin completely subsided within his form. Monstrous, said Khadgar. Medivh grinned. Little different than what Egwene had planned, for she placed the power of the Trisfolian within the child as well. Small wonder there was so little room for the young Medivh himself, with the demon and the light both fighting over his very soul. So when the power truly manifested within him, I shut him down for a while, until I could put my own plans into operation. Khadgar continued to move left, trying not to watch as Garona crept up behind the older mage. Instead he said, Is there anything of the real Medivh left within you? Some, said Medivh. Enough to deal with you lesser creatures, enough to fool the kings and wizards as to my intent. Medivh is a mask. I have left enough of him at the surface to display to others, and if in my workings I seemed odd or even mad, they wrote it off to my position and my responsibility, and to the power invested in me by my dear mother. Medivh gave a predatory grin. I was crafted first by the Magna Egwene's politics to be her tool, and then shaped by demonic hands to be their tool. Even the Order saw me as little more than a weapon to be used against demons, and so it's not surprising that I am nothing more than the sum of my parts. Garona was behind the mage now, blade drawn, moving on the softest of steps on the obsidian floor. There were no tears in her eyes, but rather a steely determination. Khadgar kept himself focused on Medivh, not wanting to betray her with a single glance. "You see," continued the Mad Mage, "I am nothing but one more component in the great machine. One that has been running since the Well of Eternity was first shattered. The one thing that the original bits of Medivh and myself agree on is that this cycle needs to be shattered. Of this, I assure you we are of one mind." Grona was within a step now, her dagger raised. She took the last step. "Excuse me," said Medivh, and lashed out with a fist. Mystic energies danced along the older man's knuckles and caught the half-orc square in the face. She staggered backwards under the blow. Khadgar let loose a curse and raised his hand to cast a spell. Something to knock the mage off his balance. Something simple, quick. Medivh was quicker, turning back to him and raising a claw-like hand immediately. Khadgar felt the air around him tightening into a restraining cloak, trapping his arms and legs and making it impossible for him to move. He shouted, but his voice sounded muffled and coming from a great distance. Medivh raised his other hand, and pain shot through Khadgar's body. The jolts of his skeleton seemed to seethe with red-hot spikes that subsided quickly into dull, throbbing pains. His chest tightened, and his flesh felt like it dried out and clawed along his frame. He felt like the fluids were being pulled from his body, leaving a shriveled hux behind, and with it he felt his magic pulled away as well, his body drained of his ability to cast spells, to summon the requisite energy. He felt like a vessel being emptied. As suddenly as the attack descended upon him, it had passed, and Khadgar toppled to the floor, the wind knocked out of him. It hurt his chest to breathe. Grona had recovered at this point, and came in screaming this time, bringing her dagger hand upwards to catch Medivh beneath his left breast. Instead of trying to back up, Medivh stepped towards the charging half-orc. Inside the arc of her blow, he raised a hand and caught her forehead in his hand. She froze in mid-charge. Mystic energy of a sickening yellow hue pulsed beneath his hand, and the half-orc hung there. Her body twitched helpless as the mage held her by the forehead. Poor Grona," said Medivh. "I thought with your conflicting heritages, you of all people would understand what I'm going through. That you would understand the importance of making your own way. But you're just like the others, aren't you?" The wide-eyed half-orc could only manage a squibble-drenched gurgle in response. "Let me show you my world, Grona," said Medivh. "Let me drive my own divisions and doubt into you. You'll never know who you serve and why. You'll never find your peace." Grona tried to scream, but it died in her throat as her face was bathed in radiant sunburst issued from Medivh's palm. Medivh laughed and let the half-orc collapse to the floor, sobbing. She tried to rise, but slumped again. Her eyes were wide and wild, and her breath was short and ragged, torn by tears. Khadgar could breathe now, but his breath was short and tight. His joints burned and his muscles ached. He saw his reflection on the obsidian floor, and it was the old man of the vision looking back at him. Heavy, tired eyes surrounded by wrinkles and gray hair. Even his beard had turned white, and Khadgar's heart sank. Robbed of his youth, of his magic, he no longer felt like he would survive this battle. "That was instructive," said Medivh, turning back to Khadgar. "One of the negative things about this human earth form cell I'm trapped in is that the human part keeps reaching out, making friends, helping people. It makes me so difficult to destroy them later on. I almost wept when I killed Morose and Cook, did you know? That is why I had to come down here. But it's like anything else. Once you get used to it, You can kill friends as easily as anyone else. Now he stood a few paces in front of Khadgar, his shoulders straight, his eyes vibrant, looking more like Medivh than at any time Khadgar had seen him, looking confident, looking at ease, looking frighteningly, damningly sane. "And now you get to die, young trust," said Medivh. "It seems your trust was misplaced after all." Medivh raised a hand, cupped with magical energy. There was a throaty scream from the right. "Medivh!" bellowed Lothar, champion of Azeroth. Medivh looked up, and his face seemed to soften for a moment, although his hand still burned with the mystical power. "Anduin Lothar," he said. "Old friend, why are you here?" "Stop now, Medivh," said Lothar, and Khadgar could hear the pain in the champion's voice. "Stop it before it's too late! I don't want to fight you." "I don't want to fight you either, old friend," said Medivh, raising his hands. "You have no idea what it's like to do the things I've done. Harsh things, necessary things. I don't want to fight you. So lay down your weapon, friend, and let this be done." Medivh opened his palm, and the bits of magic droned towards the champion, bathing him in stars. "You want to help me, don't you, old friend?" said Medivh, and the harsh smile once more on his face. "You want to be my servant. Come help me dispose of this child. Then we can be friends again." The spalling stars around Lothar faded, and the champion took a slow, firm step forward. Then another, then a third, and now Lothar charged forward. As he charged, the champion raised his rune-carved blade high. He charged at Medivh, not Khadgar. A curse rose in his voice, a curse backed by sorrow and tears. Medivh was surprised, but just for a moment. He dodged backward, and Lothar's first cut passed harmlessly through the space the Magus had occupied a half-second before. The champion checked the swing and brought it back in a solid blocking motion, driving the mage another step back, then an overhand chop, driving him back another step. Now Medivh had recovered himself, and the next blow landed squarely on the shield of bluish energy, the yellow fires of the sword spattering harmlessly like sparks. Lothar tried to cup upwards, then thrust, then chop again. Each attack was met and countered by the shield. Medivh snarled and raised a claw hand, mystic energy dancing in his palm. Lothar screamed as his clothes suddenly burst into flame. Medivh smiled at his handiwork, and then waved his hands, tossing the burning form of Lothar aside like a rag doll. "Just gets easier," said Medivh, biting off the words and turning back to where Khadgar had been kneeling. Except Khadgar had moved. Medivh turned to find the no longer young mage right behind him with the sword Lothar provided him and pressed against Medivh's left breast. The runes along the blade glowed like miniature suns. "Don't even blink," said Khadgar. A moment passed, and a bead of sweat trickled down Medivh's cheek. "So it comes to this," said Medivh. "I don't think you have the skill or will to use that properly, young trust." "I think," said Khadgar, and it seemed that his voice wheezed and burbled as he spoke, "that the human part of you, Medivh, kept others around despite your own plans, as a backup, as a plan for when you finally went mad, so your friends could put you down, so we could break the cycle where you cannot." Medivh managed a small sigh, and his features softened. "I never meant to harm anyone," he said. "I only wanted my own life." As he spoke, he jerked his hand upward, his palm glowing mystic energy, seeking to scramble Kragar's mind as he had Garona's. Medivh never got the chance. At the first flinch, Khadgar lunged forward, driving the thin blade of the rune sword between Medivh's ribs into the heart. Medivh looked surprised, even shocked, but his mouth still moved. He was trying to say something. Khadgar drove the blade home to the hilt, the tip erupting from the back of the mage's robes. The mage sunk to his knees, and Khadgar dropped with him as well, keeping his hands firmly locked on the blade. The old mage gasped and struggled to say something. "Thank you," he managed at last. "I fought for as long as I could." Then the Master Mage's face began to transform, the beard turning fully into flame, the horns sprouting from his brow. With the death of Medivh, Sargeras finally came fully to the surface. Khadgar felt the hilt of the rune blade grow warm as the fire danced along Medivh's flesh, transforming him into a thing of shadow and flame. Behind the kneeling, wounded Magus, Khadgar could see the smoldering form of Lothar rise once more. The champion stumbled forward, his flesh and armor still smoking. He raised his rune blade once more and brought it across in a hard, level swing. The edge of the blade burst like the sun as it struck Medivh's neck and severed the Master Mage's head from his neck in one smooth blow. It was like unstopping a bottle, for everything within Medivh rushed out at once through ragged remnants of his neck. A great torrent of energy and light, shadow and fire and smoke and rage, all spilling upwards like a fountain, splashing against the ceiling of the underground vault and dissipating away. Within the seething cauldron of energies, Khadgar thought he could make out the horned face crying in despair and rage. And when it was all over, all that was left was the skin and clothes of the Magus. All that was within him had been eaten away, and now his human form had been ripped asunder. There was no way to contain it. Lothar used the tip of his sword to stir aside the rags and flesh that had been Medivh and said, "We need to go." Khadgar looked around. There was no sign of Garona. The Max's head had boiled away all the flesh, leaving only the glistening red-white skull. The former apprentice shook his head. "I need to stay here. Attend to a few things." Lothar growled. "The greatest danger may have passed, but the obvious one is still there. We have to drive back the Orcs and close the portal." Khadgar thought of the vision of Stormwind burning and Lane's death. He thought of his own vision of his now aged form in final battle with the Orcs. Instead, he said, "I must bury what is left of Medivh. I should find Garona. She couldn't have gone far." Lothar grunted an accent and shambled towards the entrance. At last he turned and said, "It could not have been helped, you know. We tried to alter it, but it was all part of the larger scheme." Khadgar nodded slowly. "I know. All part of a greater cycle. A cycle that now, at last, may be broken." Lothar left the former apprentice beneath the citadel, and Khadgar gathered up what was left of the physical remains of the Magus. He found a shovel and a wooden box in the stable, put the skull and bits of the skin in the box with the tattered remains of the Song of Egwin, and buried them all deep in the courtyard in view of the tower. Perhaps later he would raise a monument, but for the time being it would be best not to let others know where the Master Mage's remains were. After he had finished burying the Magus, he dug 2 more graves, human-sized, and laid Morose and Cook to rest to one side of Medivh. He let out a deep sigh and looked up at the tower. White-stoned Karazhan, home of the most mighty mage of Azeroth, the last guardian of the Order of Tirisfal, loomed above him. Behind him, the sky was lightening, and the sun threatened to touch the topmost level of the tower. Something else caught his eye. Above the empty entrance hall, along the balcony overlooking the main entrance, A bit of movement. A fragment of a dream. Kagar let out a deeper sigh and nodded at the ghostly trespasser that watched his every move. I can see you now, you know, he said aloud. Epilogue. Full circle. The trespasser from the future looked down from the balcony at the no longer young man of the past. How long have you been able to see me? Asked the trespasser. I have felt bits of you as long as I've been here, said Kagar. From my first day. How long have you been there? Most of the evening, said the trespasser in his tattered red robes. The dawn is coming up here. Here as well, said the former apprentice. Perhaps that is why we can talk. You are a vision, but different than any I have seen before. We can see each other and converse. Are you future or are you past? Future, said the trespasser. Do you know who I am? Your form is different than when I last saw you. You are younger and calmer. But yes, I know you, said Kagar. He motioned towards the 3 heaps of turned earth, 2 large and 1 small. I thought I'd just buried you. You did, said the trespasser. At least you buried much of what was the worst about me. And now you're back? Or will you be back? Said Kagar. Different, but the same. The trespasser nodded. In many ways. I was never here in the first time around. More is the pity, said Kagar. So what are you in the future? Magus? Guardian? Demon? Be reassured, I am a better being than I was, said the trespasser. I am free of the taint of Sargeras, thanks to your actions this day. Now I may deal directly with the Lord of the Burning Legion. Thank you. There cannot be success without sacrifice. Sacrifice, said Kagar, the words bitter in his mouth. Tell me this, ghost, then, ghost of the future, is all that we have seen true? Will Stormwind truly fall? Will Corona slay King Lane? Must I die in this aged flesh in some nether-spawned land? The being on the balcony paused for a long moment, and Kagar feared that he would fade away. Instead, he said, As long as there is a guardian, there is order. And as long as there is order, the parts are there to be played. Decisions made millennia ago set both your path and mine. It is part of the greater cycle, one that has held us all in its sway. Kagar craned his head upwards. The sun was now touching the top half of the tower. Perhaps there should not be a guardian, then, if this has been the price. Agreed, said the trespasser, and as the strong light of day began to grow, he began to fade. But for the moment, for your moment, we all must play a part. We all must pay this price. And then, when we have the chance, we will start anew. And with that, the trespasser was gone. The last fragments of his being swept back into the future by an errant wild wind of magic. Kagar looked at his aged head, shook his aged head, and looked at the 3 newly dug graves. Lothar's starving men took their dead and wounded back. Surviving men took their dead and wounded back with them to Stormwind. There was no sign of Garona, and though Khadgar would search the tower once more, he doubted she was within. He would take what books he thought were valuable, what supplies he could, and set protective wards over the rest. Then he would leave as well, and follow Lothar into battle. Hefting his shovel, he walked back into the now abandoned keep of Karazhan, and wondered if he would ever return. As the trespasser spoke, a small breeze kicked up, a mere churning of the leaves, but it was enough to scatter the vision. The no longer young man broke up and faded like dying fog, and the no longer old man watched him go. A single tear ran down the side of Medivh's face. So much sacrifice, so much pain, both to keep the plan of the Guardians in place, and then so much sacrifice to break that plan, to break the world free of its lockstep, to bring about true peace. And now, even that was at risk. Now, one more sacrifice would have to be made. He would have to pull the power from this place if he would ever succeed in what was to come in the final conflict with the Burning Legion. The sun had risen further now and was almost to the level of his balcony. He would have to work quickly now. He raised a hand, and the clouds began to swirl above the peak of the tower. Slowly first, then more quickly, until the upper ranges of the tower itself were encased within a hurricane. Now he reached deep within himself and released the words made up of equal parts regret and anger, words caught within him since the day that his life ended the first time. Words that laid claim to the whole of that previous life, for good and ill, accepting his power, and in doing so accepting the responsibility for what was done the last time he wore flesh. The hurricane around the tower howled, and the tower itself resisted his claim. He started again, and then a third time, shouting to be heard over the winds that he himself had summoned. Slowly, almost grudgingly, the tower gave up its secrets. The power burned from within the stone and mortars and leached outward, channeling by the force of the winds towards the base, toward Medivh. All the visions began to bubble loose of its fabric and stream downwards. The fall of Sargeras, with its hundreds of screaming demons, fell in on him, as did the final conflict with Egwene and Khadgar's own battle beneath the dull red sun. Medivh's appearance before Gul'dan, and the boyish battles of 3 young nobles, and Morose breaking Cook's favorite crystal. All were pulled into him. And with those visions came memories. And with those memories, responsibilities. This must be avoided. This must never happen again. This must be corrected. So too did the images and powers leach upward from the hidden tower. From the pits beneath the tower itself, the fall of Stormwind flamed upwards at him. The death of Lane, the myriad demons summoned in the middle of the night and unleashed against those in the Order too close to the truth. All of them founted upwards and were consumed within the form of the mage standing on the balcony. All the shards, all the places in history known and unrevealed, sprawled down the tower and rose from its dungeons and flowed into the man who had been the last guardian of Tirisfal. The pain was great, but Medivh grimaced and accepted it, taking the energy and bittersweet moments it bore within equal measure. The last image to fade was the one beneath the balcony itself. An image of a young man, a rucksack at his feet, a letter marked with the crimson seal of the Kirin Tor, hope in his heart and butterflies in his stomach. That youth was lost to the fade. As he moved slowly towards the entrance, the magic surrounding his visions, his shard of the past sprawling upwards, unraveling him and letting the energy pass into the form of Magus. As the last bit of Khadgar fell into him, a tear pulled in the corner of Medivh's eye. Medivh held both hands to his chest tightly, containing all that he had regained, The Tower of Karazhan was just a tower now, a pile of stone in the remote reaches, far from the traveled paths. Now, the power of the place was within him, and the responsibility to do better with it this time. "And now we start anew," said Medivh. And with that, he transformed into a raven and was gone.